A very good day to all. My name is Guy Phones. I am head of the Secretariat of the Global Coordination Mechanism on NCDs at WHO. Let me extend you a warm welcome to all on behalf of my WHO colleagues and my team, but also on behalf of our extensive network of GCM participants to the fifth webinar in our series, NCD Voices in the Decade of Action. Before we jump into the very lively discussion, let me provide you with a bit of background regarding why we are here. The unprecedented COVID-19 pandemic and its response measures have brought governments and citizens to a standstill due to its devastating consequences, from the humanity of people to the fragility of the systems and structures we increasingly rely on to shape the health and well-being of people and planet. The centrality of health as a global public good across all development dimensions has been made dramatically evident. What brings us together today is anchored in the fact that the deadly interplay between the COVID-19 pandemic and the NCD epidemic has dramatically exposed a chronic vulnerability of and underinvestment in health system response to NCDs and mental health conditions. And people living with NCDs and mental health conditions have by far suffered most from the collision of these forces. Undoubtedly, considerable progress has been made towards achieving SDG target 3.4, which is to reduce by 1/3 premature mortality from NCDs and promote mental health and well-being. However, despite progress made, the momentum of change has actually dwindled since 2010. The annual decline of the risk of dying from a major NCD between the ages of 30 and 70 is slowing, and SDG target 3.4 on NCDs is off track. Currently, only 17 of 194 countries are on track to meet SDG 3.4. That is for women, and 15 for men. As we now set forth to design a comprehensive and sustainable roadmap to build back better from the impact of COVID-19 in an attempt to rebuild our way of living, consuming, and producing towards a healthier and greener path, we must recognize the urgency of understanding how to address the devastating gaps exposed by the pandemic. We must use this opportunity for a global reset. In particular, we must listen to the voices on the ground on how to refocus and accelerate the implementation of our common commitments, goals, and targets. Now more than ever, we are accountable to individuals, communities, and society. We must create resilient systems and strengthen health services and infrastructure to better prevent, diagnose, and provide care for people living with NCDs and mental health conditions, as well as design gender-responsive and inclusive measures with a particular focus on protecting and supporting the most vulnerable and marginalized. This decade of action reminds us that the foundations of the Sustainable Development Goals originate from a leave no one behind philosophy. We all align with the fact that a multi-stakeholder and multi-sectoral response is critical to understanding what it means to leave no one behind and who is actually being left behind, in order to create cross-cutting, demand-driven, and contextual responses to deliver on all SDGs. Bearing this in mind, the NCD Voices in the Decade of Action webinar series aims to pass the microphone to individuals or communities that are often left behind because there are no mechanisms in place for them to be heard. These voices are not brought to the center stage, and thus efforts towards preventing and treating NCDs and mental health conditions miss the valuable contributions, expertise, and lived experiences that can shape solutions from global to local. Today, we will maintain the purpose of this webinar series to support a meaningful and participatory process with a focus on global, local, and people action, with today's discussion on transforming food systems to build back better. Ahead of tomorrow's World Food Day celebrations, we will unpackage some of the challenges, opportunities, and voices committed to the global race to shift our food systems to a more healthy, sustainable, and equitable model. Food is the backbone of cultures and communities. Unhealthy diets are a major modifiable risk factor of NCDs, and the importance of available, affordable, and accessible nutritious foods in our food systems is crucial for people and planet. We aim to support increased action to end hunger and eradicate all forms of malnutrition worldwide, making sure that nutrition is prioritized in the policy and development agendas, ensuring transformative food systems are fully integrated into the Build Back Better movement. Finally, we must acknowledge the fantastic news last week of our UN partners winning the Nobel Peace Prize. Not only is this a great acknowledgement of the work across the World Food Programme, but also further elevates the importance of food security, the required actions needed to transformative food systems and delivering support to the most vulnerable today, tomorrow, and for future generations. To unpackage these considerations, we have the pleasure of welcoming 5 distinguished speakers to highlight the why, where, and how we can build back better. Each speaker will provide expertise, knowledge, and insights during their intervention from their respective areas in the food systems agenda. We very much welcome you all, participants, to add to the discussion through the Q&A function. Please submit your questions, as we will have a discussion at the end of the session where we can pitch your questions to any or all of the speakers. Finally, we are recording this webinar, and both the slides and videos will be made available to the group through the email and also on WHO's Knowledge Action Portal on NCDs. Before we head to our keynote speaker, we are honored to be joined by Dr. Naoko Yamamoto, Assistant Director General at WHO's Division on UHC and Healthier Populations. Dr. Yamamoto, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Guy. Good evening, good afternoon, or good morning. It's my great pleasure to welcome all of you at this Transforming Food Systems to Building Back Better webinar. Welcome. The COVID-19 has completely changed our world. More than 37 million cases of COVID-19 has been reported to WHO and over 1 million deaths. Beyond the suffering of these viruses, the pandemic has caused severe disruption of global economy, job security, education, essential health services, and food security as well. COVID-19 is exposing social and health inequalities within and between countries, and has brought negative impact to poor people and vulnerable population disproportionately. These people have more difficulty to get safe and nutritious food they need. That comes to 14% increase in children suffering from malnutrition around the world. Lack of access to safe food or consumption of unhealthy or high-calorie diet are one of the top biggest cause of global ill health. The pandemic has clearly highlighted the fragility of our current food systems. Therefore, 2 days ago, FAP, FAO, ILO, and WHO stated jointly about impact of COVID-19 on people's livelihood, their health, and our food system. We have built food system that ensure access to healthy diet for all people. To take action, yesterday DG Dr. Tedros proposed with 3 policy priorities. First, access to nutritious, safe, and affordable diet must be cornerstone of the response of COVID-19. Second, we call on all countries to take action to meet national dietary guidelines. And third, government in countries at all income level must work in the whole of government approach with private sector, civil society to support sustainable food system, then can provide healthy diet. Next year, we have a UN Food System Summit as a nutrition summit. So this is a good opportunity to raise political momentum and also translate our policy to action at the ground. Ending malnutrition in all forms and creating sustainable healthy food system require a change in how we can live, work, produce, and consume food, and we organize food system governance. So today we are going to discuss about this issue, and I'm also very glad to hear from the young people's voices, your new idea, and your voice will give us a new energy to create the next post-COVID new world, and we can work together building back better. So I wish you the productive, successful webinar, and I also would like to join to the discussion. Thank you very much. Over to you, Guy.
Thank you so much, Naoko. Inspirational, and I think you've already outlined some sort of key asks going forward in this discussion. I'm sure we're going to touch on some of them during the webinar. But now it's my also pleasure to give the floor to our director, my personal director at WHO's Global NCD platform, and Dr. Svetlana Axelrod. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Good day, good afternoon, good morning, dear colleagues, and thank you, Gary, for this very important meeting that you organized. And special thank you to my dear colleague, Dr. Naoko Yamamoto, and also Francesco, who is also today with us. Thank you, my friends, and thank you for joining us and for providing these remarks in the opening. But before I will say just a couple of words, let me ask you, colleagues, to switch on your cameras and to make a photo of all of us who are joining us today. As I could see, we have more than 70 participants online. So it's a great opportunity for us to see how it's important, this issue that we have today, and that we have different people who are joining us from all over the world. So could you please switch on your cameras, and Jack, can you please remove the slide that we can see all of our colleagues here with us, and we will take the collective picture. As it is today is the latest session of our series of webinars, I think it will be interesting to have this information, and we can share it with our Director General and also with our colleagues all over the world. But not to losing the time, and Jacqueline is moving, I just want to say that as it was already mentioned, we have this a series of webinars which are offers to support the preparation of the already mentioned 2021 UN Food Systems Summit. And this is very important that we could collect our joint efforts on this from the WHO perspective, also from the multi-stakeholders engagement of our colleagues, civil society, young people, academia, also the private sector. And as you know, the health food system are really very critical in their efforts to build a future with improved health, equality, and peace, and also change the world with the people who are empowered and resilient to withstand diet-related diseases, including the non-communicable diseases. And one of the strategic priorities of the department that I am leading, and it is the Global NCD platform, is to bring together stakeholders from different sectors to scale up actions against NCDs and all levels of our organization, global, regional, and also country level. And the critical part of our work is to mobilize civil society actors who are relevant to the NCDs, as well as there are to forge synergies with the civil society organizations from other areas of the global health. So in this context, I would like to make a moment and also acknowledge that my colleague, Dr. Francesco Branca, who will have his intervention after me, is leading the important work of the transforming food system to tackle NCDs, which is being conducted to the WHO Department of Nutrition and Food Safety. And the department that I am leading, the Global NCD platform, will continue close cooperation and work and support the Dr. Branca's efforts to convene a multi-sectoral and multi-stakeholders response to sharing transformative food system. So let me maybe stop here, and thanks all of you for joining us these seminars, and I hope we will have a productive discussion during these couple of hours. And thank you very much that Guy, you organized this and leading this process. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Lana. And we all heard your call, and you're underscoring the importance of multi-stakeholder, multi-sectoral, whole of government, whole of society responses is so critical. Not only when we look at the NCD agenda, but when we're looking into the cross-cutting, intersecting agendas that have been exposed to the COVID. In particular, transforming our food system will require multi-stakeholder response and action. So looking forward to participating in in providing those stakeholders and voices. So now to our keynote speaker, our official keynote speaker, Dr. Francesco Branca, Director at WHO's Department of Nutrition and Food Safety. It is really our pleasure to hand the mic over to you.
Thank you very much, Guy. Good morning, afternoon, evening, as we now always say to all, and particularly to my colleagues and friends, Svetlana and Naoko. Can I have my first slide, please? And in my second slide, please. So I'll start by actually saying what a food system is, since we're talking about food systems. You see the definition there. It gathers all the elements and activities that relate to the production, processing, distribution, preparation, and consumption of food, and the output of these activities. So this is a definition that comes from the high-level panel of experts attached to the Committee of Food Security. And you see the first box is about food supply chains, production system, storage, distribution, processing and packaging, and retail and markets. And all this has an effect on what? Food environments. So what foods we have close to us, and what food we can actually afford to buy, and what food we believe is desirable, because marketing makes it like that, and what food is actually safe and of nutritional high quality. All this will influence our behavior. Of course, our behavior is also influenced by sociocultural drivers, demographic drivers, and other broad drivers. But what we have close to us and what we can afford to buy is the main driver of basically what we consume. And this is what is actually going to make us choose a certain diet. And diet as a quantity component, we can have enough of it, not enough of it, too much of it, quality, diversity, and safety of that. And then all of that has an impact on our nutrition and health outcomes. So you see, it's all connected, and there are upstream determinants, very important, that drive the way these systems delivers. There are biophysical environmental drivers, technology, policy, culture, demography, urban versus rural. So all of this can actually be managed by our own choices. If I can have the next one, please. So food system is actually closely associated to health. And a couple of years ago, the IPES Food, together with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, produced a very interesting report called Unraveling the Food Health Nexus, which was describing very well the channels of impact that a food system would have on health. And there are multiple. The first one is about occupational hazards. And you see the number of deaths that are associated with agriculture and fisheries, for example. We have a second impact channel, which is that of environmental contamination. The food system can actually transmit diseases to humans, and what we call the zoonotic diseases. And actually COVID-19 can be listed among the zoonotic diseases, as far as we understand its origin. But also the way that production is done, for example, using antimicrobials in farm animals and in aquaculture, can actually lead to resistance to certain antibiotics, which also has a very remarkable impact on human health, as well as then the presence of those certain chemicals in the environment. Particularly in this case, I'm highlighting the endocrine disrupting chemicals, which may have an impact. Third channel is food safety, or contaminated, unsafe, and altered foods. This is the data from the WHO burden of foodborne disease analysis. We're actually updating it now. But that was showing that we could have 420,000 deaths. A lot of them, in fact, a third of them for young children, diarrheal disease, a major impact. Fourth impact is the one on unhealthy dietary patterns, and this is actually also associated with obesity and child and maternal malnutrition. The data you see there have been published by another beautiful report, the report of the Global Panel of Experts of Agriculture and Nutrition, just released last month. And the analysis included there indicate that if you sum all these different nutrition-related or diet-related risk, you basically can account about 20% of the global burden of disease expressed in death and disabilities. And the fifth channel is, of course, around food insecurity. The latest report of the state of food security and nutrition in the world, SOFI 2020, indicates that we still have 690 million people who have inadequate access to food. But actually, this number can even be greater if we consider the moderate forms. Next slide, please. When we talk about malnutrition, we need always to have in mind that we have to talk about different forms of malnutrition. In fact, the Sustainable Development Goals, the Agenda 2030, talks about all forms of malnutrition. What do we mean by that? This assumption actually was inspired by the World Health Assembly with its 5 nutrition targets. We actually like to refer also to 2 of the non-communicable disease targets, which are also related to diet. But anyway, this is the situation in terms of where we are with the achievement of those targets. We have still 144 million children with stunting, 47 million children with wasting, and then 38 million of children under the age of 5 are overweight and obese. So overall, we are not on track to achieve this global nutrition target. On top of this, we have the anemia in women of reproductive age, which has now been included among the targets of the SDGs, and of course, the epidemic of obesity. And particularly, I'd like to focus on the 600 million who are obese, and I'll tell you in a minute why this is important. But let's move to the next slide. Again, talking about the food system. Well, this is a dire situation. Again, this is an analysis coming from the SOFI 2020 report. I mean, all those areas in red are the places of the world where actually a healthy diet is not affordable to the poor people. Well, can you find areas where actually it is affordable to all? Hardly. So, I mean, if we consider that the line of poverty is $1.9 US expressed in purchasing power parity. So that's, the minimum. And then if you consider that 63% maximum can be used for food, I mean, you have to have some other little money for the rest of your living, but 63% is considered, the minimum level for food, then you see that boils down to $1.20. I mean, in how many countries a healthy diet is less expensive than $1.20? Basically nowhere. So we have 3 billion people in the world who cannot access a healthy diet. Next slide, please. So that's the impact of the food system on health. But the food system doesn't only have an impact on human health. It has an impact on the health of the planet. And through this mechanism, or at least through these 3 mechanisms, one is the greenhouse gas emissions. I mean, you see, it's true, energy is still the one that contributes the most to the greenhouse gas emissions, 64%, but 24% is actually accounted by the food system. Water, fresh water, 68%, and then 37% of land. Plus we have the impact, for example, on eutrophication of waters due to the excessive use of nitrogen fertilizer. Next slide, please. COVID-19 has made things unfortunately worse. And you can see the impact of COVID-19 has been throughout that chain, that food system, what we also call the farm to fork or the farm to flush. You know, we have had impact on the shortage of inputs that have not been delivered to farmers. We have had a problem on wages of farmers. We have had a problem of shortage of labor, post-harvest losses, you know, crops that have been left on the fields. We've had a problem of transport of perishable commodities. In some cases, foods have been blocked in containers in harbors. We have had limited access to markets. And of course, we have had a reduced food availability and purchasing power of people. Just to give you some numbers, WFP considers that we probably are going to have additional 135 million people who are not going to have sufficient food. Daily school meals, I mean, school feeding has been a very important mechanism for food security. 368 million children are going to miss or have missed these meals. And then 49 million people push in extreme poverty. This is just the extreme situation. The calculation is that for each percentage point in GDP lost, we are going to have 700,000 stunted children more. And you know, the estimates indicated we're about to lose in some parts of the world 10 points. So it's a disaster. We estimate that 6.7 million children are going to be wasted in addition to the 44 we already have. Next slide, please. So COVID-19 has been a disaster also because health services have been disrupted. Now, just look at the middle of this slide where you should see the management of moderate and severe malnutrition. These are countries that are reporting disruption of services. And you see half of the countries are actually reporting disruption of those services. And you know, the same numbers as for sick child services. I mean, the basic services have actually not been delivered. And next slide, please. And this is particularly looking at non-communicable disease. No, the one before, please. Non-communicable disease services. Can I have the one before, please? Non-communicable disease services. Yeah, this one. If you particularly look at the second and third column, talking about hypertension management, diabetes and diabetic complication, again, 40–50% of countries reporting disruption of services. So you see, there is a disruption of the food system, but there's also disruption of the health system that again are collaborating to make things worse for people who are already affected by non-communicable diseases and by the consequences of consuming an unhealthy diet. Next one, please. So we have really been able to document a deadly interplay, as Guy was putting it in his introduction, particularly diabetes, cardiac disease, hypertension have been comorbidities documented in COVID-19 patients in several countries. And if you go to the next slide, obesity has seen as actually as a factor contributing to greater risk of the negative consequences of getting a COVID-19 infections. I mean, this is a meta-analysis and shows that people with obesity have at least twice the risk of getting hospitalized by COVID-19. But you see, actually, it's a long range. In some studies, you have up to 7%, 7 times. Next slide, please. What can we do about it? I mean, we've been highlighting the need to act on food system since many years. In 2014, we had the second International Conference on Nutrition, which led to important commitments from countries. It was translated into the declaration by the UN General Assembly of the UN decade of action in nutrition until 2025 with a clear set of priority actions. At the same time, we saw that the COVID-19 pandemic came in the middle of the decade, and so a scale up of action was needed. Next slide, please. The Secretary General brought together all of us, all his UN team, produced a very interesting brief in October 2020, and he was basically saying what I've communicated to you today: food system, health system, and social protection systems need to collaborate if we want to protect nutrition. Strengthening social protection, health systems, mobilizing our resources to protect the food system, food workers, to keep trade corridors open. That it was something that it was absolutely needed to scale up. And no surprise that WFP was helping in addressing these challenges, has been awarded a Nobel Peace Prize. We're all proud of that. It's a testimony of how the UN system can actually address these challenges in the world. UN Secretary General has also said, well, actually, this is an opportunity to build back better and to change the food system in a more radical way. WHO has also launched a manifesto for healthy green recovery to indicate that, and that includes a reference to food system. But as it was already anticipated in the introductory remarks, and can I have the next slide, please? The Secretary General has called for a UN Food System Summit, and he wants it to be a people summit with maximum possible inclusion. He wants it to be a solution summit where we're not just having declarations, we're actually going to come to the summit with solutions. And all constituencies are invited to actively work in these 5 areas: ensuring access to safe and nutritious food for all, shifting sustainable consumption patterns, boosting nature-positive production at sufficient scales, advancing equitable livelihoods and value distribution, building resilience to vulnerability, shocks, and stresses. So we're all going to work for this. WHO is what is called a UN anchor agency for this action track number 2 particularly. So we do look forward to working with all of you on the Food System Summit. So let me just close with my take-home messages for you. Next slide, please. And yeah, we would not reach our global nutrition targets and goals unless we take action. Food systems are failing us. Food systems need to stay within our planet's ecological boundaries. Remember, we're going to grow. We'll be 10 billion in 2030. Food systems can be a building block, and I'm happy that we're part of a division dealing with healthy societies, also tackling the climate crisis and addressing biodiversity loss. And we're going to actually tackle COVID-19 and use this wake-up call that COVID-19 gave us to rebuild our food system, starting from the UN Food System Summit. Let me close with a quote. Next slide, please. Given yesterday by DG in his speech to the Committee of Food Security. Equitable access to safe food, healthy diets and care is not an aspiration for the future. The time to fix our food system is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Francesco. Inspiring words, and your presentation really provided the complex setting for our discussions going forward, not only today, but certainly going into the UN, the Global Summit. We provided a very dramatic and stark picture on why we should build back better regarding nutrition and food systems. And this is part of a broader call. This webinar is part of a sustainable call to mobilize all on to understand how we can do it. And we appreciate those clear calls from the UN Secretary General that will shape the summit and try to understand and unpackage those innovative, forward-thinking solutions as stated by you, so clearly by you. And I was personally impressed by that slide on the channels of impact of the food system on health, and really sort of it gives a clear overview of the intersecting agendas that really come back to the SDGs and push us towards understanding an intersecting integrated response through the SDG model. And we really appreciate the participants providing any resources relevant to any of these interventions. We want to thank Cassia Murphy. She's just provided some additional resources regarding exactly that. It's unraveling the food health nexus. You'll find it on the chat, and we invite all to provide additional resources as we go through the webinar, which are very useful for all. And again, also, if anyone has any questions for Francesco or any other speaker, do use the Q&A function. We will be picking up questions there and forwarding them to the relevant speakers. So throughout this webinar series, our previous 4 sessions, we have highlighted that the importance of the role of youth as both advocates and agents of change in the NCD agenda. And this has been very clearly integrated also into the overview of the UN Summit, as we will hear. It gives us great pleasure to hand over the reins to a youth champion. Lana Weidgenant is a climate activist and vice chair of Action Track 2 of the 2021 UN Food Systems Summit. So it is our pleasure to pass the mic to you, Lana, to navigate us through our esteemed panel.
Thank you, Guy. I'm really excited today to introduce you all to a panel with Ms. Patty Fong, Program Director of Climate and Health and Wellbeing with the Global Alliance for the Future of Food, also with Professor Harshpal Singh Sachdev, Senior Consultant in Pediatrics and Clinical Epidemiology, Sitaram, Bhartia, Institute of Science and Research, and with Ms. Maureen Muketa, founder of Tulivema, fellow of Young African Leaders Initiative. These honorable panelists will guide us to the implementation of a planetary health concept for food system sustainability, and also the building of future food systems with young leaders. I also want to encourage here anyone who has not already submitted questions in the Q&A to please do so, as I will be looking to those after the following speakers. So as you're hearing the next few speakers, please keep in mind questions as we'll be going into a discussion after that. I also want to again emphasize the importance of centering the UN Food Systems Summit, as Dr. Francesco Branca has also spoken about, and how this is really a key international opportunity coming up in 2021 and a full year-long process leading up to that, to elevate the public discourse on the importance of food systems and to yield significant action across government, across private sector and civil society, with measurable outcomes that will enable achievement of the Sustainable Development Goals. As everyone is a part of food systems, everyone is also invited to be involved in the one-year lead up to the UN Food Systems Summit. Food system dialogues will be conducted in all countries of the world, with the first one starting already next month. And a powerful digital platform will also be available 24/7 soon to engage with the UN Food Systems Summit up to and beyond 2021. As it has been stated, this will be a People's Summit and a Solutions Summit, raising game-changing solutions to drive us towards fulfillment of the SDGs and delivering platforms where everyone's voices can be heard. Conversations such as the one we're having today are vital in beginning these global dialogues about the food system's role in health and environmental action and in our futures. Through the one-year lead up to the UN Food Systems Summit, I hope to pass the mic to all of you. Now, to begin our panel, I will pass it on to Ms. Patty Fong, Program Director of Climate and Health and Wellbeing at the Global Alliance for the Future of Food.
Thank you, Lana. It's an honor to be speaking on this panel, and I have to admit it's a hard act to follow Dr. Branca's presentation, but I will try my best. Can you skip to the next slide, please? Actually, the second slide. Next one. Next slide. Thank you. Let me start by first giving you an introduction to the Global Alliance for the Future of Food. We are in a strategic alliance of 28 philanthropic foundations working together and with others to transform global food systems now and for future generations. Our mission is to leverage our resources and networks to help transform food systems towards greater sustainability, security, and equity. Our work is guided by a set of 7 shared principles: renewability, resilience, equity, diversity, healthfulness, inclusion, and interconnectedness. These principles shape our vision of the future of food, express our values, and encompass the change we want to make. Next slide, please. The COVID-19 pandemic highlights the fragility of our food systems and the deep interconnections that exist between human, animal, and planetary health. It has amplified the stark realities of food access for the most vulnerable and heightened the risk factors for those suffering from NCDs. It's important to put COVID in the context of 3 interlinked health crises that result from food systems not being fit for purpose. First, we are experiencing a human health crisis. I don't need to tell this audience the number of people suffering from malnutrition and unhealthy diets. Dr. Branca has also mentioned the 5 impact channels in the IPES food report, which Kasia also put up in the chat box. That is food insecurity, occupational hazards for food workers, environmental contamination, antimicrobial resistance, and contaminated, unsafe, and altered foods. But second, we are in the midst of an ecological health crisis. Food systems are responsible for almost 60% of global biodiversity loss and represent between 21 and 37% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Land use change and deforestation are primarily caused by the expansion of food production into previously untouched ecosystems, especially for livestock production. It's the single biggest environmental driver of new disease outbreaks by exposing humans and domestic animals to wildlife and the diseases they carry. COVID-19 is one of the latest in an increasing emergence of these zoonotic diseases. Third, we have an animal health crisis. 60% of all mammals on Earth, 70 billion animals, are farmed for food worldwide every year. The majority is produced under intensive livestock production with poor animal welfare standards. These systems drive the increased use of antibiotics and are also connected to the emergence of zoonotic diseases. All the efforts we see today to address these symptoms will not do much to stop the decline and build resilience unless we change the narrative. That is, the mindsets, assumptions, and structures that defined our systems. By changing the goals of the system, we change the system. This will then drive new policies, practices, investments, and business models. Next slide, please. There's a common rallying call to build back better, but building back better isn't enough. We have to tackle the root causes of our health crises by addressing human health and planetary health together. There are a number of factors that determine whether we experience good physical and mental health and well-being, such as safe food and water, culturally respectful and nutritious diets, empowerment, and integrated government action. But underpinning all of these is the state of our planet's ecological and animal health. This includes climate, soil quality, water quality, biodiversity, pollination, pests and diseases, nutrient cycling, and animal welfare. Next slide, please. It's time to counter a pervasive and powerful narrative which dominates our global food systems. This narrative shapes how our food is produced, harvested, processed, distributed, marketed, eaten, and disposed of. It drives and dominates research, investments, policy priorities, and the practices of actors across the agri-food sector, from governments and research establishments to investors and businesses. This prevailing narrative focuses on the quantity of food and calories produced. It is based on assumptions that we need to maximize yields and double food production for 2050. This narrow focus has come at the expense of other goals, like health and ecological integrity. As a result, it has led to today's predominantly industrialized food systems being at the heart of many of the health crises we face. Over the last 2 years, we partnered with Tasting the Future in a stakeholder-led engagement process to gather insights and feedback from over 100 individuals and organizations across many contexts, scales, cultures, and geographies to identify what needs to change. We also identified examples of local and national initiatives that demonstrate how collaboration amongst a range of actors can deliver healthier food systems. This stakeholder-led process resulted in a new global narrative that prioritizes nourishing a global population while ensuring human, ecological, and animal health and well-being. It focuses on the quality of food produced so that it contributes towards renewable, resilient, healthy, equitable, inclusive, and culturally diverse food systems. This global narrative, in turn, must be complemented by multiple visions and narratives that reflect cultural diversity and different priorities at different scales and within different geographies. Next slide, please. Through this stakeholder-led process, we identified key differences underpinning the assumptions of the prevailing narrative versus a health-focused narrative. A few examples include shifting from "we need to feed the world" to "the world feeds itself," a world in which citizens and communities grow their own food with dignity, retaining rights to their products and access to markets. From food as a commodity to healthy and sustainable diets as a public good, where farmers, producers, citizens, and healthcare professionals are supported to promote health, and where the resilience of local and regional food systems is prioritized. Next slide, please. From profit maximization to value maximization, from decision-making by an elite few to citizen participation and democratically accountable institutions, from a lack of transparency and accountability to full transparency and accountability. Next slide, please. From responsibility falling on the individual to health and sustainable diets as a public good, and from a focus on silver bullet solutions to support for a diversity of solutions appropriate for a diversity of contexts. Next slide, please. COVID-19 is a wake-up call to shift away from the prevailing narrative. We are seeing growing evidence that our industrial food systems are not fit for purpose, and yet there is not enough political leadership. 2021 will be a critical year for decision makers. The Committee on World Food Security will adopt voluntary guidelines on food systems and nutrition. The Convention on Biological Diversity, COP15, will adopt a new framework for halting biodiversity loss and restoring nature. There will be a first ever UN Food Systems Summit. And COP26 will be the most important climate summit since the landmark Paris Agreement was agreed in 2015. And not to mention the Nutrition Summit that will also take place towards the end of next year. Leaders and decision makers must choose the pathways that lead us towards a sustainable, equitable, ecological recovery with health at the center. This week, we launched a call to action for governments with 14 recommendations for supporting healthy food systems. These recommendations have been informed by stakeholder interviews with more than 100 individuals and organizations. Next slide, please. The Government Guide to Action is complemented by a sister publication highlighting 13 case studies from around the world, each of which supports at least 4 and as many as 11 of the 14 recommendations in the Government Guide. They include examples from Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Chile, Denmark, United States, Kenya, Brazil, Rwanda, China, India, Peru, and the Philippines. Next slide, please. In closing, it's time, and it is possible, to transform our food systems for human and planetary health. Deep and lasting change can only come when multiple actors and sectors that do not ordinarily work together seek a collective path forward. Such coordinated action will simultaneously improve our health, food security, and nutrition, while reducing pressure on land, regenerating our ecosystems, and tackling climate change. Thank you.
Thank you, Patty. That was, I think, a really important framing with the human, ecological, and animal health and well-being. I always think it's super important to include how sustainability and planetary health ties into not only health in the present, but also for future generations and for the planet. So really wonderful to hear that. Next, we'll be hearing from Professor Harshpal Singh Sachdev, Senior Consultant in Pediatrics and Clinical Epidemiology. Professor, really excited to hear from you.
Yeah, thank you. Can I have the first slide, please? I am indeed privileged to be among a galaxy of speakers on this very important subject. And my topic will be dealing with children primarily. Next slide, please. Now, most of you would be wondering that what do children have to do with a problem of middle age or old age? Well, my first response to that is children are the future of tomorrow, and they are the ones who are going to go into the middle age or become the elderly later on. But more important, let me try to convince you from a biological perspective that the disease, all the non-communicable diseases, or at least the majority of them, have their insidious origin right after birth or in early childhood. This here is data from a long-running cohort of which I'm privileged to be a part, the New Delhi birth cohort, with 4 generations being followed up for the last 50 years. So we reported in 2004 data when these cohort subjects had become 30 years old. We defined impaired glucose tolerance or diabetes mellitus in these cohort subjects. And as you see, on the x-axis is the age, and on the y-axis is their measure of thinness or the body mass index standard deviation score from the cohort subjects. Initially, the children were thin. They became thinner till about 3-4 years of age, and then started a slow characterization of them by a slow and an insidious upward onset in becoming relatively fatter or obese according to their own earlier thinness. And by the age of 30 years, when they had landed up with diabetes mellitus, the change in their body mass index score was about half a standard deviation. Now, this has been recorded for several other diseases like coronary artery disease, hypertension, a similar pattern, and across the globe. But an important point that I wish to make in this slide is that this is based on a cohort mean of the New Delhi birth cohort subjects, which is about 1 standard deviation below the average of the WHO reference standards. In other words, what I'm trying to convey is what children are supposed to be underweight or undernourished, or call them wasted, whatever you want. Half of these children who landed up with diabetes mellitus later on in the life would have been categorized as undernourished by this. So I hope I have been able to convince you from this, there's a lot of data on this, that the disease had its origins right at birth or a little later. Next slide, please. But another important aspect is that the risks in childhood tend to be ignored because the threats are somewhat invisible. And this here is fresh data from a rigorously conducted comprehensive national nutritional survey, as yet unpublished, which was conducted all throughout India, rural, urban, poor, rich. And this data is really scary from my perspective. If you take about 19,000 children in this aged 5 to 19 years, then we had markers of dyslipidemia, increased lipid levels, or dysglycemia, impaired glucose tolerance, as you can see in the red portion of the pie, in 56.2% of the subjects, and this would refer to as metabolic obesity. And these are cutoffs defined by very high values, which in the literature or by experience are supposed to undergo a treatment, including dietary restrictions and physical activity. But what really is startling, if you see on the right side of this slide, is what is the relationship of this metabolic obesity with the thinness in this national data from India. Now, of course, the ones who are overweight or obese, as by the WHO definition, the rightmost two bars have slightly higher prevalence of metabolic obesity, 63%, 69%. But what is really startling is that if you come to the extreme left bar, which is the children who are wasted between and adolescents between 5 to 19 years, those who are categorized as thin and are usually prescribed more food or energy dense food, in them even 55% of them have evidence of metabolic obesity. And this phenomena was described by us about 15 years ago, and people were polite, and when I presented such data, they would think that is there something wrong with the data? Is it odd? But they were polite enough. And now this has been confirmed here and in other countries in children that even normal weight subjects can have enough perturbations in metabolic obesity, the precursors of non-communicable diseases. Next slide, please. Well, there are other reasons why children especially in the low middle income countries should be focused upon, because the early food habits of the taste track and they tend to become addictive. It's difficult to get back from the later in life. They are in a phase of developmental vulnerability when they are gullible and susceptible to any thoughts and the industry has been very smart to adopt this life course approach to catch them early so that there is a brand loyalty throughout the life, and the deprived and the uneducated are more at risk. And more importantly, the children and the adolescents who are sensible enough are rarely consulted for their decision making. Next slide, please. Well, what has happened to our food systems as it relates to children now? They are unhealthy or ultra-processed foods, which are high in energy density, fats, sugar, and salt. They are cheap, convenient, very tasty, leading to hyperpalatability and addictive nature. So what's wrong? Why not continue with them? Well, the main answer is they are harmful to the health and equity. There is tons of data suggesting that these are one of the major contributions to the escalation of the non-communicable diseases, to the environment, as has been shown, and to the rights of the children, and causing a food culture invasion, contributing to unhealthy and unsustainable diets. Yet, even realizing that the sales are rising nearly everywhere, you can see in the right two graphs, all continents, rich countries, poor countries, but the ray of hope is the rise is not as much in the poor countries. So what could be our broad policy objectives in this context? We could halt the rise, reduce their consumption, and minimize the harm caused by them. But this alone will not work. It has to be replaced by the promotion of traditional natural food-based matrix with minimally processed diets. Next slide, please. Now, many areas need to be taken into context. There's multi-causal etiology. Many speakers, the speakers earlier have already alluded to them. The WHO Lancet Commission on Child Health thought that commercial marketing of harmful products to children is one of the very important things which should be taken up, because it exploits the children's developmental stage to sell harmful products, including alcohol, tobacco, and unhealthy foods. There is enough data from Australia about alcohol being advertisements. 5 to 6 year olds in Brazil, China, India, Nigeria, and Pakistan could identify the cigarettes and the latest threat of e-cigarettes in the USA. Next slide, please. Sadly, industry self-regulation does not work. This has been shown umpteen numbers of times in studies from developed countries and even Mexico, USA, and the others. We cannot, the industry self-regulation does not reduce their business. They continue to exploit with the advertising. Next slide, please. Now, Chile was one of the first countries to take up the challenge. It had a multi-pronged obesity prevention program in which they made it mandatory for the nutrient profiling model about how much sugar is added, sodium is added, saturated fat is added, or energy density of all the foods. And what were the interventions that they proposed? They had a front of package warning label, which was a very simple warning showing that this food is healthy or unhealthy to eat. And importantly, they had regulatory marketing restrictions for high energy, fat, sugar, salt foods, which included restricted advertisement to children, restricted technologies to enhance the sales, for example, giving the toys, making it cheaper, 1+1 and other things, and school-based restrictions prohibiting sale of such products within the schools and outside. They are, of course, considering future taxation. Well, did it work? Some before and after experience showed that industry decreased the sugar and sodium in the food and beverages by 20%, and the exposure to such high in advertisement decreased to almost half, especially for the adolescents. Next slide, please. The country I come from, India, also has some positive experiences. We were amongst the first to adopt the Infant Milk Substitute Act, and its implementation has been helped by NGOs like the Breastfeeding Promotion Network of India. And this here, by an independent evaluation, shows the difference in the sales of the baby foods between China, the blue bars, you can see how they have zoomed over the years, while the ones for the India, the yellow bars, have remained stagnant. There are other examples too. After a lot of pitching in and a habit by pressure by the NGOs and scientists, the school regulations have just been notified last month. It's a slightly diluted and a watered form than the ideal one, but at least it's a start. The Indian Academy of Pediatrics has brought out guidelines for the foods which should not be consumed, also known as the junk foods or the high industry ones. And then there are NGOs like the Nutrition Advocacy for Public Interest, which writes is vigilant for celebratory and endorsement of products to be stopped. And we have been successful with very high celebrities on once and twice, but it is just a voluntary effort. Next slide, please. Well, we still have miles to go in this perspective. You can see for the food environment and the system, some of the things which have been in the anvil or should be done. You can see school food standards, marketing of the children, front of the pack labeling, portion size, taxes, and the infant milk substitute legal framework. It is just from varying from 6% to 43%, much lower than the 100% that we can want. Well, my personal opinion is we may push in with as much regulations as we want, but force won't happen. We have to also simultaneously focus on behavioral change of the children, which would be longer lasting. We should capitalize on this lifetime product by food-based profiling instead of nutrient-based profiling, sticking to the traditional diet cultures. Brazil has shown the way by having nutrient dietary guidelines. Next slide, please. The Lancet series made a commitment that the Commission proposes a binding treaty and optional protocol to the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child so that it becomes binding on the governments to go from this. Next slide, please. Finally, this call to action by the Lancet series on child health to ensure a healthy future for all children. Collective action is needed, keeping the children at the center, from political leaders to civil society, international agencies, communities, families, and from children. With this, I thank you for a patient hearing. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Professor, especially centering the youngest generation and holding businesses accountable, both very important. Now I will pass it on to Maureen for our final presentation before discussion.
Thank you, Lana, and I'm glad to be a part of this conversation. And I am really excited to pick up from where Professor Sachdev has left from, and I will begin. So a little bit about what we do. Tulevyema exists to raise awareness of proper feeding habits in the community, and we work with young women of reproductive age as well as general community members. Next slide, please. So as we all know that the general population is mainly youthful, and we have over 1.2 billion people between the age of 15 to 24 years. And these young people represent 16% of the global population. And youth are stakeholders in food systems and potential agents of change. So it is very important for, as we work towards building back a strong food system, it is essential for the youth to be involved in this process for sustainability purposes. And it is also noted that youth are greatly influenced by their direct environment more than any other group. This is because they are still in their growing period. They are also trying to figure out themselves. So the environment plays a really big role in the food choices that the youth make, and also how they will grow up to be in the future. So it is very important for well-timed interventions to be produced and to be incorporated for long-term dividends, because it is at this phase that the youth develop values, behavior, and habits which are malleable. There's a saying that says it is good to correct a child when they're still developing. So it is also important for the youth as they are growing to know the importance of nutritious food meals, good food choices to make, and also for them to contribute towards creating an enabling environment which nutritious foods will be accessible not only to them but to everybody, the wider population. We are also seeing that food systems encompasses all in the entire range of actors, and they're all interconnected activities in feeding our population. I like what Lana said at the beginning when she took over, that food systems involve everyone. So we all have a role to play. And today I'll be speaking about the youth. Next slide, please. So what are some of the ways in which the youth can help in building a sustainable youth system, a sustainable food system? And one of the ways is to position themselves in various positions of the food system chain. So our food system has different positions. There's all the way from the fork from the farm to the fork. Sorry about that. So there's the process entails cultivation of this food all the way to consumption and also food losses. So it is important for youth to identify various positions or various sectors in this along this chain where they can contribute towards enabling a sustainable food system to be developed. So not all of us need to be farmers. We can position ourselves in the agricultural point of view where there's cultivation. We can also position ourselves in the marketing group. There's the delivery, and now we are seeing a lot of innovations that young people are coming up with. We are seeing the IT field is really coming up, is really doing well in terms of innovation. So young people can use their skills to develop ways in which things like seed improvement can be done to ensure better yields. Yesterday, I saw that the Kenyan government has introduced a new type of a high yield finger millet type of finger millet, which the production is almost double what used to be produced. So these are some of the ways in which the youth can contribute with the knowledge that they have acquired. And also another way in which youth can help build sustainable food systems is for all of us and to encourage diet champions. So what diet champions basically do is they promote awareness of nutritious foods and the benefits of consuming these foods. This diet champions is a model that has been used in Uganda, and we are seeing Uganda really making great steps in terms of the type of foods that they consume. Uganda is well known for its, they have been able to successfully maintain consumption of traditional foods, especially vegetables and even other food crops and tubers. So it is important for food champions to be identified. When we see youth involved in cultivation of these vegetables, of these foods and tubers or any crops, it is important for the system. And now this is a call of action to my fellow panelists who spoke earlier on. It is once we see youth who are really involved and really enjoy being part of any aspect of the food system, it is important for us to continue encouraging them and to provide good environments for them to continue doing the good work that they are doing. And this can also be done through youth-friendly celebrity endorsements. We are seeing there's a lot of part of the reason why non-communicable diseases, especially the dietary non-communicable diseases, are on the rise is because of increased consumption of highly processed foods. And why there's increased consumption of highly processed foods is, one, they are readily available and they are heavily marketed. So it is also important for the youth and generally the food production industry to involve youth in terms of helping them or giving them platforms in which they can advertise nutritious foods. We are seeing a lot of heavy advertisements on highly processed foods, and the same effort that is being put in advertisements of these highly processed foods, I believe the same effort can be put in advertising the minimally processed foods and the natural foods, which have already, and when there's advertisements of these foods, the healthy foods, the nutritious foods, we will see a growing demand. And so this means these foods will be cultivated in larger amounts because there's a growing demand, and consequently, the prices of this food will go down. One of the reasons why nutritious foods or healthy foods are not widely consumed or readily available is because they are quite expensive. So creating an environment where there's awareness, we build awareness of the importance of these foods. Professor has talked about the front label strategy. Instead of putting the ingredients or what the nutrient value of a food at the back, it is important for the system to be changed and for the value to be put, the nutrient values to be put in the front of these foods, so that people are aware of the types of foods that they are consuming, which leads to better food choices. And then the other thing in which youth can help in building sustainable food systems is by youth groups lobbying for businesses to create an enabling environment from the government at all stages. Remember, we say the food system is not only one aspect, there is the whole aspect from cultivation of this food, the healthy food, to consumption of this food. So youth groups to come together, there's power in synergy. Let us not work as different individuals, but come together and lobby for good business environments to be created, and also subsidizing of farm produce and products like the seeds, and also making extension services available to farmers, because the other thing we are seeing is extension services or extension service officers are not they're not readily available, if I'm to use that term. So also farmers are practicing agriculture from an apprentice point of view, what they grew up seeing, instead of incorporating new technologies and new farming techniques that have been brought, that have continually continued to come up. And so it is also important for the agriculture. It is also the other way in which youth can help build a sustainable food system is for the agriculture industry to become as competitive as the IT industry. So one reason why youth are not involved in agriculture is because, especially in Africa, is because most people grew up in the rural areas. And one of the ways, or one of the signs of a successful person is them not cultivating or them not working in a farm, which is very unfortunate. But I understand where this point is coming from, because agriculture as it is right now is not very, it's not very welcoming, or it's not an appealing type of business, because why would someone cultivate food, work in a farm, plant a food crop, let's say maize, have to wait for about 4 to 6 months for this maize to grow, while they can do a different course or engage in even something as small as business and get almost instant money. So systems need to create an enabling environment for agriculture and the various groups in a food system to be more appealing to the youth. And also the other way in which youth can help build sustainable food system is for the youth to lobby in taxation of things like highly processed foods such as sugary foods, or regulations of online advertisements. So you find that things like the highly processed foods, the highly processed foods as a way of trying to reduce their consumption one way would be to increase the tax bracket of this food, so that we discourage the consumer. And also, now that we're discouraging
I'm just going to jump in. We need to wrap up really quickly because we only have a few minutes left. So if you just want to wrap up say your last sentence, and then we'll move on to discussion.
Sure. So the high taxation of incorporation of tax in these highly processed foods will discourage the consumer from consuming these foods and make the highly processed, the nutritious foods accessible through advertisement. So my next slide. So my main take-home message is to increase advertisements of the nutritious foods, and also raise awareness of the importance of incorporation of why eating a healthy food, nutritious food is important, so as to bring down and reduce the amount of the increasing rate of the non-communicable diseases. So as I finish, it is failure to equip the youth right now. We risk permanent loss of food culture for the next generation. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And we will go into our panel discussion now just for a few minutes. And I also want to invite Dr. Francesco Branca to join us as well. I know you're not represented in the graphic here, but we'd love to have you join us in the panel discussion. And I also want to flag for everyone listening that there have been some great answers already provided in the Q&A and the answered section. So if you haven't gone through those, or if you've asked a question, or you just want to look at some of the answers to questions that have already been asked, there are some great ones there. So since we only have a few minutes, I just want to pose one question to all of our panelists, which is based on one of the questions in the Q&A, which is, what are the most important actions that can be taken? And I want to expand this to not only member states, but for each of you to highlight one really key action you think would be important and game-changing, whether that's for private sector, for civil society, or for government. So if each of you could just take turns highlighting an action that you think would be really important to transform our food systems. I'll pass it on to whoever wants to get us started. Professor, would you be open to getting us started with one action that is transformative?
I think, as I had earlier said, that we need to fix our regulations and recognize that the process is starting from the children, and we should be beginning at them by a dual action of regulation of preventing the unhealthy foods from coming, as well as a behavioral change for them to adopt a healthy food. And this will require action on several fronts. There is no one single point that can be, or a single person who can do that. Thanks.
Thank you. Patty, would you be open to go next?
Sure, I can cheat and say, well, we've just released a report that has 14 actions, so we should just go and look at that. But if I could just raise it up a bit, my entire presentation was about shifting narratives. We have to shift the stories that we tell ourselves about what's possible, because that's going to drive everything from policies to practices to investments.
Definitely super important. Dr. Francesco Branca.
Hi, Lana. It's nice to be with you in another call in the same week. In the ICN2, we had a lot of recommendations, 62. And I'm quoting Patty, silver bullets are difficult. But if I have just one bullet, it's the public investment, the follow the money, the money that could be invested, for example, in public food procurements, or the money can be invested in the subsidies. I mean, that money is going to make the change. Thanks.
Definitely, I definitely agree with that. And sometimes it doesn't mean finding new investments from nowhere, but just shifting from unsustainable to an unhealthy foods to sustainable, healthy foods. Maureen, if you're still there, could you give us your one transformative action? Okay, maybe she'll be able to go later, or feel free to add in the chat as well, Maureen. And lastly, I'm just going to ask really quickly, and anyone can answer this, who is not included in the conversation that you would want to pass the mic to? So if anyone has any insights really quickly on that, given the theme of the webinar. Oh, Maureen just messaged me. The question was, we're highlighting one action that is transformative and that you would really recommend, whether that's in government, private sector, in transforming food systems. And then I was also asking for anyone, if there's anyone you've passed the mic to who's not already included in this conversation.
Yes, I would pass the mic to the Sun African movement, the Scaling Up Nutrition movement, because they have been really instrumental in raising awareness of what proper nutrition is, and great to have them on board and learn from them.
Perfect, thank you. All right.
If I could jump in, we need to pass the mic to those who are producing our foods, but in all contexts, right? So big farmers, small farmers, and especially the most vulnerable smallholder farmers, and also those who are consuming food. So I mean, that's everyone, it's all of us, but also the most vulnerable communities in terms of to get their first-hand perspective of what accessibility and affordability means to them.
Thank you, Patty. I will now pass it on to Guy for concluding remarks.
Thank you so much, Lana. But maybe before I let you go, what about you? Who would you pass the mic to?
I would pass the mic to the activists I know who are even younger than I am, who are in secondary school and fighting every day for a more just, sustainable future.
Hope we can do that. That would be amazing. Thanks so much. Well, thank you, Lana. That was an excellent moderating skills, and you took us through some very interesting presentations. An excellent question at the end. I think we've got some great ideas, and we will sort of shape some of these conclusions and comments and provide further guidance. Again, the slides and the recording will be shared in complete. But then I'll have some concluding remarks. It's been an excellent conversation, and we really do hope you've enjoyed it thoroughly, and you can continue unpackaging some of the slides and the interventions that you've heard. Sort of in short, I think the COVID pandemic really has shed incredible light on several societal fractures, including those in our food systems, and threatening the lives and livelihoods of people globally, especially the most vulnerable. And this has been put forth in many of the interventions, especially the most vulnerable and underserved, and those in fragile contexts. So really understanding how COVID-19 has affected people, including their nutrition, the impact of food systems on health, which is so interesting, and on the prevention and control of NCDs and mental health, and the critical interplay of the risk factors and determinants that are cross-cutting and intersecting. All of this is crucial to shape that much needed human rights-based and health-focused narrative to build back better, more robust food systems. And I underscore human rights. We've heard a bit of the narrative underpinning all of these discussions that should include a human rights-based approach. And I call for us to discuss that thoroughly as we go into the UN summit. If we are to commit to that UN summit also and focus on people and solutions, then we must note that the Commission that Professor Harshpal presented really called for children and youth to be engaged as agents for the future of food. And I think we've heard that we made an effort to include that in the presentations and in the participants, to hear that youth voice. And certainly, if we are to leave no one behind, we must ensure all of these voices are not only heard, but incorporated into the co-creation of inclusive policies, practices, narratives, and solutions. We look forward to the milestone UN food system, where the global community will reshape our food system through innovation, co-production, and cross-cutting approaches, and most importantly, community and people engagement and action. So a huge thank you to all the speakers who shared their knowledge and experiences and highlighted some very, very important steps and calls as we go forward. My last comment is to invite you all to our next webinar on the 5th of November, where we will pass the mic to partners, stakeholders, and colleagues focusing on supporting resilience in humanitarian settings during and after a global pandemic. We have an interesting proposal lined up for some speakers, but we really encourage any of you who want to share some proposals for speakers or comments or suggestions for that discussion to please share with us through email. Looking forward to that. So thank you so much. It was an excellent discussion, and we will certainly build the momentum for the next year's summit. Thank you so much.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.